you smell what the Rock is cooking?
So anyway, the next story, this is from Seattle, and oh shoot, let me pull up my paywall remover, because this is
nice.
behind a paywall. Okay, it worked this time. So this is an article, it came out at the beginning of this month, first published January 5th, and the headline is, Seattle Police Faked Radio Chatter About Proud Boys as CHOP, aka CHAZ, formed in 2020. And it basically talks about how the downtown police were broadcasting over their radio that a group of Proud Boys were like looking for a fight and were coming to fight in an attempt to scare off the protesters at CHAZ. So what are your thoughts on the basics of the story?
I mean, it's crazy because I remember that happening. Like when, like that summer when all the George Floyd protests were going on, there was a week or so where I was like kind of glued to like the police scanner and just watching all the live streams. There's this one Twitch channel that was this like just wall of various protest footage. But there's just so much like paranoia and like misinfo and disinfo going around at the time that I just remember people talking about this. Like, are the Proud Boys coming? And then it's like it kept not panning out, but then they just kept feeding that back into like the police scanner. Then there are other things that they would plant as well. Like they would report over the scanner that they had found like a stash of Molotovs or something. And I mean, unfortunately, CHOP did kind of devolve into like a not great scenario.
Yeah.
But I mean, it definitely wasn't the kind of like blaze of violence that as like police, I don't know, land offices and stuff saw in like other parts of the country. So I mean, to this day, I still don't know if there are actually like stashes of Molotovs all around the city. That does seem a bit extreme.
Yeah, I kind of doubt it.
Yeah, right. But I mean, especially like in the PNW, there's like a pretty high kind of preponderance of Proud Boys.
True.
And even like before the summer of 2020, I was living in Capitol Hill, and I would just see on like lampposts and stuff, people would put up like, "Hey, watch out for XYZ Proud Boy who's like in the area or something." So it's like on the one hand, I'm sure they were around, but they clearly never showed up at CHOP the way it was being like broadcasted that they were going to.
And I mean, I also want to, this isn't talked about in the article, but, and maybe you know more details than me, but basically wasn't CHOP set up? Because the details I remember is that a guy like drove into the protests on Capitol Hill and like shot someone, or shot, I don't know if he shot someone, and then come to find out that he was related to someone on the police force. And then the police began destroying documents and abandoning the police precinct, and then CHOP was set up around it. Are those details correct to your knowledge?
I forgot that was the chronology of it. So like I do remember there was they were, because for whatever reason the police just wouldn't let protesters march past that, like the Capitol Hill, I forget the name of the precinct, but yeah, past that like East precinct. So that just became this kind of standoff. And yeah, like there's that one day where someone drove in, and then it looked like they're gonna drive into the crowd, and a guy like ran up to the car to try to stop the guy, and yeah, that was the guy who was shot. It was like in the arm or shoulder or something, so he thankfully was fine. And then the shooter, just like strangely similar to the what's his face in Kenosha, just kind of like with his hands up holding the gun, walked towards the cops, and then they just kind of like let him by. Yeah, I had heard, like, I at the time didn't know how much of a rumor it was or whatever that he was directly related to them, or that was kind of the impetus for them destroying documents and getting out of that office. That is interesting though, because there was like that 2 or 3 day period where there was this standoff, and then one morning the cops just like pieced out, and then I was like, oh, okay, what happens now? Are they going to come back? Like, what's going on? And then, yeah, from there, I have to assume they just had people kind of infiltrating the scene at CHAZ Chop. There were enough, I think, maybe kind of also like amped up and unstable personalities involved anyway, that they could probably just kind of apply a light amount of tension to, I don't know, let the thing kind of devolve the way it did. And then, a week later or whatever, the mayor kind of had the whole thing brought down.
Yeah, I'm trying to look for details because I don't want to report anything like wrong. Okay, yeah, here we go. So this is even on Wikipedia, and I am looking at the sources cited. It's like both from KUOW and Como, KUOW's NPR, Como's local news. So it says, the situation intensified after 8 p.m. when a demonstrator was shot while trying to slow down a vehicle speeding towards a crowd on 11th and East Pine. The driver left the vehicle with a gun and walked towards the police line, where he was taken into custody without incident. It later became known that the shooter's brother worked at the East Precinct. After midnight on June 8th, police reported that protesters were throwing rocks, blah, blah, blah. And the next day is when they vacated the East Precinct.
It was so bizarre just the way they fully did vacate, brought like computers and documents with them. And ultimately still nobody, I think as far as I know, like got into the precinct. I remember I wasn't, not to be like I was deeply involved in Chaplet CHAZ. I like visited one afternoon, and there was definitely a sense of like, we are staying away from the precinct, just to like not give them what they want. We're not going to burn this down. Because it was also, the building was like attached to like apartments and like other kind of older buildings. There's like an old movie theater in the area that would probably have also been burned down if people burned the precinct. So there was this sense of like the precinct was kind of left there as bait, and when nobody took it, things seemed like they're kind of just allowed to like deteriorate in other ways.
Mm-hmm. So getting back to this story, I wonder, because they have some direct quotes from what the police were saying. One of their lines was, quote, "It looks like a few of them might be open carrying." And then another one that says, quote, "Hearing from the Proud Boys group, they may be looking for somewhere else for confrontation." And so these lines are pretty funny. It's like, oh my gosh, there's so many scary guys here. We're not going to fight them, but they want to fight somebody. Where are they going to go? Like, it's just such, like, very
Yeah, it's like cartoonish
funny.
almost.
Yeah.
And also, are you guys like in contact with them? How do you know that they're coming?
Yeah. Just like, yeah, these guys are pretty scary. We just talked to them and they said they're going to go beat them up. It's like, yeah, it's pretty silly.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the really kind of bad parts about it, although it's not shocking at all, is that no one involved in this like misinformation campaign is really getting punished in any way. But it's what you'd expect. I mean,
yeah.
Really.
I mean, there was so much of this going on at the time, and I'm sure, continues to. But that summer was it was like rife with that.
Yeah, those were different times. I mean, at that point, I was living in Philadelphia, and I was involved with a couple protests there, and one of them got really really ugly because so it was a small protest compared to some others, and we were basically going along a route that the Philadelphia PD laid out for us, and they kind of like directed us towards the freeway. Like that might sound like weird, but like they were kind of like leading us onto the freeway almost. And
Yeah,
then
that was happening in Seattle too.
yeah, and then when we get on the freeway, they come in from opposite sides of the on-ramp and basically trapped people on it. And there was a lot of tear gas. I got tear gassed really bad. And
Wow.
me and my fiance basically had to climb up this like encampment because it was a sunken freeway with like grass hills on each side. We had to climb up of that to get away, but some people who got stuck on the freeway were like really brutalized by the police, and I saw like someone having a seizure in the middle of the freeway.
Oh my God.
And there were cars on it too. It wasn't empty. So that's like my freakiest experience with the George Floyd related protests.
Yeah, thankfully didn't end up in like a situation quite like that, but there was so much of just chatter on like Twitter and the other kind of odd discords and stuff that would pop up where it's, one person would be saying, hey, we want to like go onto the freeway and block it to like make a point in that regard. And then someone else would be saying, no, that's disinfo. They're trying to lead you onto the freeway where you can be kettled and then arrested for blocking traffic. And just that, I think, ultimately kind of led to my, I guess, reluctance or skepticism of that kind of more like anarchic organization where when it's ostensibly horizontal like that, it's like information could be coming from anywhere. You don't really know who you should be trusting or what really is going to be doing good. And that's like, unfortunately, I think the uncertainty like kind of destroys those movements.
Yeah, because I was living in Portland when Occupy was going on, and what it eventually kind of turned into was kind of like a homeless camp. Like, I don't think a lot of people sleeping there were actually homeless. They were just there for the cause, but like there was not even a concept of leadership. Like the park was basically just a camp, and like that's good. Like, nothing against that, but like it is like there's nothing like there's no political power in like a homeless camp. It's not like there's no engine driving that to something.
Exactly. It's like we're opposed to like the current authority, but then by opposing any form of authority, we're just kind of like expending energy and not really in any particular direction.
Yes. Well, hopefully that is a lesson for the future.
Yeah.